be clear, this is a warning. The story is only to help you understand how easily your life and loved ones can be taken. No one is beyond the grasp of the darkness. We all fear it. It was 8 days before Christmas. Holiday cheer seemed to be amping up throughout my friends and family. I was feeling like it was gonna be a nice Christmas. I'd finished 90% of my shopping, and the other 10% I knew what to get. I just had to go get it. Miss Gillespie was an elderly woman who lived next door. She was quite possibly the sweetest, most giving person I had ever met, always making sweet treats for my family and I. She was a Holocaust survivor. Over the years, I'd listened to fascinating stories about her life. During these stories, many photos were shared, mostly black and white. Some stories were sad, but she preferred to focus on the good ones. The story that always stays with me is the one about her tea parties as a young girl with her favorite doll, Beatrice. She had an old black and white photo of her and Beatrice at a small table enjoying some fake tea. She would always say she wished she still had Beatrice. Then she'd laugh and say, "We were best friends, you know." And that's when the little girl giggle would always come out. The thought of it always makes me smile. One day, I was out finishing my shopping when I saw her. Sitting in a second-hand store front window was Beatrice. I rushed in and bought her. She was in pristine condition. I could see why Miss Gillespie was drawn to her. She had a very kind smile. I was very excited to get home and wrap her. After a bit of a stressful ride home with holiday shoppers everywhere, I turned down my street and was horrified by the sight of police and EMS in front of Miss Gillespie's house. I rushed to the nearest first responder. "What happened?" I asked. He told me she'd had a terrible fall. "I'm sorry," he said, "but she didn't make it." My heart sunk in my chest. I stood in the yard for a bit, just trying to wrap my head around it. As the cold began to set in, I told myself to go home. I kept thinking that I never got to say goodbye. I didn't think her passing would affect me like this, but I had never lost anyone. Christmas came and went. I tried to be the happy, cheerful person I was, but inside, I just wanted to tell her how special she was. Sometimes people do things they normally wouldn't do when you're grieving. This is where I went off the rails. I went back to the second-hand store. I went to the attendant and asked if they had any old Ouija boards because I'd like to buy one. "Certainly," she responded. She reached under the counter and pulled out a large black velvet bag with a rosary tied to it. She loosened the drawstring and pulled out a very dated-looking Ouija board. She said she keeps it in a blessed bag so spirits can't escape the realm. We stared into each other's eyes. Then she busted out laughing. "Just kidding. That's how I got it," she said. "I just like to see the look on people's faces when I tell them that." I chuckled and said, "Well, I'll take it." Wasn't long, and I was back home. I went to the basement to avoid attention. I placed the board in the center of an old folding table. Directly behind it, I sat Beatrice. I placed my fingers on the planchette. There were no instructions, so I tried what I'd learned in every cheesy horror movie about witch boards, also known as Ouija boards. I started by asking if Miss Gillespie would talk to me. I waited, but no response. "Are you okay?" I asked. Still no movement. I thought to myself, this must be a game of patience. I completely relaxed and just stared at Beatrice. As my heart rate slowed, the planchette began to move. It moved at a much slower rate than what I'd seen in the movies, but letter by letter, it spelled out a message. I literally held my breath. As it came to stop with the final letter of the message, I exhaled. "Welcome us," was the message. Just then, Beatrice fell from the table. It scared me. I told myself that had to be me. Maybe I got so scared I bumped the table. I quickly bagged the board and planchette. I even remember pulling the drawstring as tight as I could. Beatrice went back into an old box I had found for her. I opened a cupboard and placed them both inside. I walked away and wouldn't look back. 6 days passed with no disturbances. On the 7th day, I was at home working in my office paying bills. I felt I was being watched. I looked into the family room. There was a black shape peeking around a door frame at me. I sat still and just watched. It never approached, it just watched. Finally, in an angry tone, I said, "Who are you?" As quick as I finished my sentence, it was gone. From that point, these dark shapes seemed to come in waves. Sometimes as many as 4 were watching me. Home, work, outside, even the grocery store. I never felt alone. Obviously, not the outcome I'd hoped for when trying to visit Miss Gillespie. I knew I opened a door, and I didn't know how to close it. A close friend was very knowledgeable about religion. I called him for advice. After a 5-minute verbal scolding about not knowing what entities you're contacting, he finally asked if I placed the planchette on the goodbye message on the board. I told him I wondered what that was for. He said in disgust, "That's the only way to end the session or close the door, as you say." "Well, now you know how to fix it. I just hope it's not too late." He said, "Go fix this. Don't wait. Go now and stop playing with things you know nothing about." I walked away wondering what I invited into this world. When I got home, I started to feel sick. All I wanted to do was lay down. I pushed myself to go to the basement. As I pulled the board from its bag, the nausea in my stomach unleashed. I vomited all over the table and the board. When I looked up, I saw the dark shapes across the table. I was sure they didn't want to go back. I placed the planchette over the goodbye portion of the board. "Miss Gillespie, if you can hear me, please know we miss you and we love you. Goodbye, and goodbye to any who are here that don't belong here. Please move on." I opened my eyes, and the shapes were gone. I know you always feel better after you throw up, but my nausea was gone as well. I returned to the second-hand store with the board and Beatrice, and yes, I washed and sanitized them. The store clerk asked if I wanted a refund. I said no, I'd just like to donate this stuff. She thanked me, and I left. I haven't seen any dark entities since, but I can't help but look over my shoulder from time to time. My advice is always say goodbye, especially to the ones you love. My warning is, don't ever play with a Ouija board. It's the devil's